Picture a small woman in a bouffant hairdo, standing in the receiving line at Claridge's in London, 1963. On her head, a soaring diamond tiara that once belonged to a Prussian princess who had tea with Queen Victoria. Around her neck, an emerald Kokoshnik that started its life in the Russian Imperial treasury. And hanging from a band of pearls against her chest, a sapphire. Not a sapphire brooch. Not a sapphire necklace. A single cushion-cut stone the size of a man's fist, weighing 478 carats, that had already been coveted by a Spanish queen, worn to a Romanian coronation, and passed through the hands of one of the world's greatest gem dealers before landing here, in the ballroom of a London hotel, on the neck of the Queen of Greece. Her name was Queen Frederica of the Hellenes. And this is the story of her jewels. Welcome back to Jewelry Pleasure. If you're new, this channel is about the actual stories behind famous jewels, where they started, who wore them, and what happened to them after. Comments and likes keep the research going, so thank you. Subscribe if you want more. Now, Frederica. The woman behind the diamonds. There is a reason Frederica is so rarely the star of a jewelry video, and it has nothing to do with her collection. She was, in the words of her Greek critics, very Prussian. Controversial almost from the moment she arrived in Athens. In Greece she was accused of authoritarian meddling, of being the real power behind her husband's throne, of spending lavishly while her subjects were still recovering from a civil war. The left never forgave her the fact that she had, as a teenager in 1933, briefly been enrolled in the girls' branch of the Hitler Youth, and that two of her brothers had served in the SS. At a dinner during Princess Elizabeth's 1947 wedding in London, when Winston Churchill brought up the Kaiser, Frederica cut him off with the observation that she was equally descended from Queen Victoria. She had a point. Princess Friederike Louise of Hanover was born in 1917 into the kind of lineage that reads like a European history textbook. Her mother was the only daughter of Kaiser Wilhelm II. Her father was the head of the deposed House of Hanover. Through both of them she descended from Queen Victoria, from King George III of Britain, and from practically every significant German royal house of the 19th century. She grew up in exile. Her grandfather and father had both lost their thrones before she turned 2, shuttling between Austria, Germany, and Italy. She met Crown Prince Paul of Greece in Florence, at the home of his mother, who happened to be her distant cousin. Paul proposed during the 1936 Berlin Olympics. They married in Athens in January 1938. 3 children followed quickly: Sofía, born in 1938, Constantine, born in 1940, and Irene, born in 1942, in Cape Town, because by then the German invasion had forced the family into exile again. They returned in 1946. On the 1st of April 1947, when Paul's uncle King George II died, Paul and Frederica became king and queen of the Hellenes. Her 17 years as queen were genuinely turbulent. Greece was still recovering from civil war. She organized 53 institutions, the Queen's camps, that fed and sheltered war-orphan children. In 1953, Time put her on the cover. She toured Europe, the United States, Ethiopia, Thailand, and wherever she went, she dressed the part. Queen Sophie's diamond tiara, the piece she refused to give away. There's a moment in 1963 that says everything about Frederica's relationship with this tiara. Queen Ingrid of Denmark had brought her famous pearl poire tiara to the Greek monarchy centenary gala, and it had been left behind in Copenhagen. So Frederica lent her Queen Sophie's diamond tiara instead. Just handed it over, for the evening, as if it were an everyday favor. The tiara had been in the Greek royal family since 1889. It had belonged to a Prussian princess, a Greek queen, and was worn by a Romanian one before reaching Frederica. And she lent it like she lent a scarf. The tiara was made as a wedding present for Princess Sophie of Prussia, sister of Kaiser Wilhelm II, when she married Crown Prince Constantine of Greece in 1889. It's a large, open-work diamond piece, ornate scrolls, floral motifs, the kind of tiara that photographs from across a ballroom. Sophie wore it for nearly every formal portrait of her life. After her death in 1932, the tiara passed to her sons, King George II and Prince Paul. Her daughter Queen Helen of Romania was photographed wearing it in portraits taken in 1934, but it was Paul who gave it to his bride as a wedding gift in 1938. Frederica wore it at her own wedding, with a small Hanoverian crown perched on top of it. She wore it at King Paul's accession portraits in 1947. Through the 1950s and 1960s, perched on her signature bouffant, it appeared at state visits to Yugoslavia and Ethiopia, at the Vatican, at King Paul's 60th birthday banquet, at the Greek banquet at Claridge's. When Frederica gave away most of the royal parures to her daughter-in-law in 1964, she kept this one. Held onto it through the exile after 1967, through Constantine's years in London, through her own wandering years in India and Madrid. When she died in 1981, the tiara went to Constantine, and then, for over 40 years, it disappeared. Historians who specialized in royal jewelry began quietly assuming it had been sold during the hardest years of the family's exile. Then, in 2012, Crown Princess Marie-Chantal of Greece walked into Queen Margrethe II's Ruby Jubilee banquet at Christiansborg Palace in Copenhagen wearing it. The same tiara. Still intact, still in the family, after more than 4 decades out of sight. It caused considerable excitement among royal jewelry followers who had long assumed the piece was gone. The 478-carat Cartier Sapphire. Cartier first acquired this stone in Paris in 1913. A cushion-cut Ceylon sapphire, cornflower blue, 478.68 carats. Not a sapphire but the sapphire, the kind of stone that only exists in stories. Cartier set it in a sautoir with 7 other sapphires, then remounted it as a pendant on a diamond and platinum necklace, and brought it to an exhibition in San Sebastian in 1919. Queen Victoria Eugenia of Spain saw it and wanted it badly. Her husband King Alfonso XIII refused to buy it. His exact words, according to the story, were that only the nouveau riches can afford such luxuries. We kings are the nouveau pauvres of today. The sapphire moved on. In 1922, King Ferdinand of Romania bought it for Queen Marie, Frederica's husband's first cousin's mother-in-law, which gives you a sense of how tangled these royal families were, for 1,275,000 francs paid in 4 installments. Marie wore it at her coronation in Alba Iulia and in the Philip de Laszlo portraits that made her famous. After the abolition of the Romanian monarchy in 1947, her grandson King Michael sold it to Harry Winston. And then, in the early 1960s, the Greek shipping tycoon Stavros Niarchos bought it from Winston and gave it to Queen Frederica. She wore it at the Greek state banquet at Claridge's in 1963, hanging from her pearl and diamond necklace against a white gown. She wore it at the Waldorf Astoria in New York in January 1964, when Barnard College gave her an honorary doctorate. She wore it at her son's wedding ball that September, at the wedding of Prince Michael of Greece in 1965, at a gala at the Teatro Real in Madrid in 1966. That Madrid appearance was the last time anyone photographed it on her. After 1967, the sapphire vanished with the family into exile. It re-emerged, very quietly, at Christie's Geneva on the 19th of November, 2003, catalogued as property of a noble family. It sold for 1,916,000 Swiss francs. At the time, it was among the largest sapphires ever offered at a public auction. The buyer was widely reported to be the Qatar Museum's authority. The stone has since been displayed at major Cartier exhibitions around the world, including the 2025 retrospective at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. A stone that started with Cartier has, in a sense, come back to Cartier, on museum walls, behind glass, still that same cornflower blue. The Greek emerald Parure. The cabochon emeralds that form this Parure didn't begin their life in a jeweller's workshop. They arrived in Greece with Queen Olga, born Grand Duchess Olga Konstantinovna of Russia, when she married King George I of Greece in 1867, almost certainly part of her dowry from the Russian Imperial court. For decades Olga wore them not as set jewelry but simply sewn onto fabric, or pinned as scattered brooches, which was a notably Russian way of wearing gems at the time. After Olga's death in 1926, the stones were inherited by her grandson King George II, whose wife Queen Elizabeth of Romania had them properly reset. It was Elizabeth who created the flexible Kokoshnik tiara we know today, 7 enormous round cabochon emeralds in a diamond scroll frame, with the E cipher woven into the interlocking motifs. The E stood for Elizabeth, who commissioned it. It's a remarkable piece, bold, slightly Russian in feel, and unmistakably royal. The Parure passed to Paul on George II's death in 1947. Frederica debuted it, the Kokoshnik worn as a necklace, layered beneath Queen Sophie's diamond tiara, at the wedding of Princess Elizabeth and the Duke of Edinburgh that same November. It became her signature layered look of the late 1940s and 1950s. Diamonds and emerald cabochons stacked on her bodice, the scale of it almost theatrical. She did wear the Kokoshnik as an actual tiara on important occasions: the state visits to France and Germany in 1956, the Greek monarchy centenary gala of 1963, the state visit to Thailand. But mostly she used it as a necklace, which was characteristically unconventional. When Frederica gave the Parure to her daughter-in-law Princess Anne-Marie of Denmark as a wedding gift in 1964, it was exhibited among the other wedding presents for the public to view. Anne-Marie still wears it today, most recently in Copenhagen in 2022, which means these Russian Imperial emeralds, which started life sewn onto Queen Olga's court dress, are now circling through another generation of Nordic Greek royal life. The ruby olive wreath, a love story, one stone at a time. The family story behind this Parure is the kind that could easily be dismissed as royal mythology, except that it's documented in the memoirs of Olga's own son, Prince Christopher. King George I of Greece, so the story goes, bought his wife Queen Olga a single rare pigeon-blood Burmese ruby on every wedding anniversary. Over the years the rubies accumulated, and eventually there were enough to set a full Parure, an olive wreath tiara of diamond leaves with cabochon ruby olives, matching drop earrings, a substantial necklace of ruby and diamond clusters, and 2 large brooches. The shape, the olive wreath, was deliberately, specifically Greek. A piece made from stones collected over a long marriage, shaped into a symbol of the ancient world. When Olga died in 1926, the rubies passed to her second son Prince Nicholas of Greece. His wife Princess Nicholas, born Grand Duchess Elena Vladimirovna of Russia, wore them frequently and lent them to her daughters. Princess Olga of Yugoslavia wore them at the coronation of George VI in 1937. Princess Marina, Duchess of Kent, borrowed elements of the Parure. The rubies moved through the world of European royalty like something shared between intimates. In 1956, Princess Nicholas lent the rubies to Frederica for the state visits to France and Germany. By this point, the old princess was unwell, and she added a codicil to her will leaving the rubies to Queen Freddie, much to the unhappiness of her own daughters, who had worn them for years. When Princess Nicholas died in 1957, the Parure went to Frederica outright. She wore them at the pre-wedding ball for her daughter Sophia in 1962, and during the state visit to Britain in 1963. Then, in 1964, she gave the whole Parure to Princess Anne-Marie as a wedding present, continuing the pattern of passing the identifiably Greek pieces to the woman who would be reigning queen. Anne-Marie still wears them today, most recently in Copenhagen in 2022. And a smaller ruby and diamond brooch from the same original set is now worn by Princess Alexandra of, so even the fragment of this collection is still alive in European royal life. The Prussian Tiara, 4 generations in one family. This tiara was made in 1913 by the Berlin court jeweler Koch as a wedding present from Kaiser Wilhelm II to his only daughter, Princess Victoria Louise of Prussia, on her marriage to the Duke of Brunswick. 25 years later, Victoria Louise gave it to her own daughter as a wedding present, to Frederica, for her marriage to Paul of Greece in 1938. Frederica wore it for her engagement portraits. Then she married into one of the grander collections in Europe and put it in a drawer. It was a beautiful tiara, a neoclassical platinum Kokoshnik with columns, laurel leaves, and Greek key meanders, but it simply couldn't compete with Queen Sophie's diamonds. So the Prussian tiara waited. It came back out on the head of Princess Sofía, Frederica's teenage daughter, who wore it on the 1956 state visits to France and Germany and at King Paul's 60th birthday banquet in 1961. And in 1962, Frederica gave it to Sofía as a wedding present for her marriage to Infante Juan Carlos of Spain. Sofía wore it at both her Catholic ceremony and her Greek Orthodox ceremony, the tiara paired with a lace veil that had originally been Frederica's own. In Spain, the tiara kept going. Sofía lent it to her daughter Infanta Cristina for the 1988 state banquet for Queen Elizabeth II. And most significantly, she lent it to her daughter-in-law Letizia for the 2004 royal wedding to the future King Felipe VI. A tiara made in Berlin in 1913 was worn at a Madrid royal wedding in 2004 by the woman who is now Queen of Spain. It has been worn by 4 consecutive generations of women descended from Kaiser Wilhelm II. Not many pieces of jewelry can say that. The diamond bow brooch, a survivor. Its exact origins are uncertain, possibly inherited from Frederica's mother-in-law Queen Sophie, possibly from her own mother Victoria Louise. A 4-ribbon diamond bow with a central cluster, designed so that various pendants could be hung from it. A solitaire diamond, an emerald, a ruby, a pearl. It first appeared in the late 1930s and simply never stopped. Frederica wore it at Paul's 1947 accession portraits, at the 1948 wedding of King Michael of Romania, at the 1956 state visit to France, at her grandson Crown Prince Pavloz's christening in 1967, by which point the colonels had taken power, Constantine's counter-coup had failed, and the family was living in Rome. At the christening of King Felipe VI of Spain in 1968, in exile. Frederica died in Madrid in February 1981, aged 63, during what reports described as eyelid surgery, though the precise circumstances were never entirely clear. The bow brooch passed to Constantine. Queen Anne-Marie has worn it since, at Prince Joachim of Denmark's 2008 wedding. Princess Alexia of Greece wore it at the wedding of Crown Princess Victoria of Sweden in 2010. A 4-ribbon diamond bow, origin unknown, has now crossed 3 generations and 6 decades. It is currently with the Greek royal family. Somewhere. The Vladimir Sapphire earrings. One last Romanov thread. Source: Queen Frederica of Greece and her jewels, a comprehensive profile. These earrings arrived in Frederica's collection from a direction that, at this point, you'll find almost predictable: Russia. They were originally part of the collection of Grand Duchess Maria Pavlovna of Russia, known as Mie-Chantal, matriarch of the Grand Ducal Vladimir branch, the woman whose famous Vladimir tiara is now among the most celebrated pieces in the British royal collection. When Mie-Chantal fled Russia ahead of the revolution, her jewels were smuggled out of the Vladimir Palace by her son and a British diplomat, and eventually divided among her children. Her only daughter, Princess Nicholas of Greece, born Grand Duchess Elena Vladimirovna, inherited the diamonds and pearls from her mother's collection, including these large sapphire earrings. Princess Nicholas wore them in Athens for years. By 1966, she had long been gone. She died in 1957, and the earrings had passed within the family. It was Queen Helen of Romania, Princess Nicholas's niece by marriage and a woman who shared that same network of Romanov-descended Greek royals, who eventually found herself needing to sell. In exile in Italy and in straitened financial circumstances, she parted with the earrings. Her sister-in-law Frederica stepped in and bought them herself, reportedly intending to pair them with the Cartier 478-carat sapphire, which she already owned. A practical decision, and a generous one, keeping the stones within the family's orbit rather than letting them disappear entirely into the market. It's a small story, 2 earrings, a private deal between relatives, but one more connection back to Imperial Russia, to the Romanov women who scattered their jewels across Europe as they married out, fled, or simply needed money. Frederica bought them, wore them, and eventually they moved on with the rest. When you look at the great photographs of Queen Frederica, the 1947 accession portraits, the 1953 Time magazine cover, the state visits of the 1950s, the centenary gala of 1963, the same gemstones come back again and again. Queen Sophie's diamonds perched on her teased hair. The Greek emerald cabochons interlocked across her bodice as a necklace. The Cartier Sapphire hanging from its band of pearls. The diamond bow brooch winking on her shoulder. It is the portrait of a small woman from a deposed German dynasty who married into a monarchy that had existed for barely a century, and wore it like something ancient. By the time she died in 1981, the monarchy was gone, the family was in exile, and the most famous stone of all was on its way to an auction house. But Frederica had been careful about what she gave to whom, and why. The Greek parures, the emeralds, the rubies, went to the woman who would have been reigning queen, and Anne-Marie wears them still. The Prussian tiara went to Sofía, and Letizia has worn it since. Queen Sophie's diamonds stayed with Constantine, and Marie-Chantal, causing considerable excitement among everyone who had assumed they were gone. The jewels are still out there, moving through the next generation and the one after that, worn by granddaughters, daughters-in-law, and great-granddaughters-in-law. Frederica herself is barely remembered now, except by people who find themselves, for whatever reason, looking very closely at what royals wear to banquets. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Which of Frederica's jewels surprised you most? And if you'd like to see more stories like this one, please don't forget to subscribe.